Now getting into the latter half of the war, the tables were being turned on the Third Reich. One of her most senior SS men, Reinhard Heydrich, had been assassinated in Czechoslovakia. As a result of this, an operation in his name sped up the extermination of the undesirable population of Europe. Before long, countless Jews, Romani, prisoners of war, disabled people, homosexuals, and more were being massacred and slaughtered and murdered. By now, the men of the SS Totenkopfverbände, the heinous guards and administrators of the concentration camps across Europe, were moving from place to place. Some went to the front lines from the camps and vice versa. Some went from camp to camp, but one thing was certain. The SS was in total control of the extermination and were trying to hide this murder from the world. In the beginning stages of the war, the Germans looked to be invulnerable. They were invading countries, and successfully, all over the place. But now in 1943, there is a different reality, one that Adolf Hitler would never come to accept. In July, the Germans would fall to the Soviets at the Battle of Kursk, an enormous tank battle in western Russia that would ultimately prove to be a momentum shifter in the war. Now it is the Soviets on the attack and the Germans defending, not the other way around, as it had been since Barbarossa began. Several SS divisions would take part in the fight, but they were not able to come out victorious. There would be tens of thousands of German casualties at the Battle of Kursk. At around the same time, the other Allied powers were about to land in Sicily as part of an invasion of Italy, ultimately southern Europe. Before this commenced, however, the British would launch Operation Mincemeat, which would fool the Germans into thinking the Western Allies were landing primarily in Greece. As a result of this, soldiers were placed in Greece from other parts of Europe, including the Eastern Front, which would lessen the strength of the Germans there. When the Americans and British landed in Sicily, the Germans and Italians there were overwhelmed and outmanned, and because of this, it was only a matter of time before Italy was liberated from fascism. At this point, the Waffen-SS was losing many men. The Germans were now on the defensive and effectively losing the war, and many within the Reich, including SS personnel, began to realize the war was lost. Things didn't improve when the Western Allies successfully invaded Normandy, France on June 6, 1944. Before the invasion, Adolf Hitler ordered that the west coast of Europe, from Spain to Norway, be fortified. This is when the Atlantic Wall came to be. This was a gargantuan line of defensive fortifications that stretched for thousands of miles. In addition to fixed defenses like bunkers, there would be many soldiers stationed across France in particular, as that is where the Nazis believed the almost inevitable invasion would come. There would be several SS divisions and panzer crews in France, including the relatively new SS Hitlerjugend division, which was made up of boys of the Hitler Youth. Despite all of these intense defenses, the Western Allies were able to get a foothold in Western Europe following D-Day. Following the invasion, there would be many war crimes committed against Allied POWs at the hands of the SS divisions, but before long, France had been liberated. The SS's death grip over the country had finally come to a close. By now, it was December 1944. The Nazis were almost done, and the Waffen-SS was suffering many, many casualties. There wasn't a whole lot of optimism left in the Third Reich at this point, but Hitler did not care. He still thought that the war could end favorably for the Nazis. This is when he ordered the Battle of the Bulge, the last major Nazi offensive of World War II. Occurring in the Ardennes forest in Belgium, the offensive would not end Hitler's way, as the Allies would prevail. This didn't stop the SS from committing more heinous acts, however. Just a day after the initial attack, Joachim Peiper of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler would command his men to kill almost 100 surrendered American prisoners. By the following month, the ruthless Red Army of the Soviet Union was closing in on the borders of Berlin. Adolf Hitler had retreated to his bunker, and the Germans were all but certain to lose the war. From this point on, Allied soldiers on both sides of Germany began to discover the horrors that were the SS-run Nazi concentration camps.
The experience and the sights and the sounds and the smells were absolutely, words cannot describe. And I can't describe it either. It was absolutely horrendous. I mean, I've been, and we've all been fighting for months through Germany and used to seeing casualties and people being killed and maimed, but never as we'd ever seen anything like this. There were thousands of dead bodies lying about. Actually, it turned out about 10,000 dead bodies lying there. When we got there, there were said to be 60,000 people in the camp, of which 10,000 were dead, and they in fact were dying at 500 a day. And the disease, the emaciation, and the horrors that were there, absolutely indescribable.
As word spread of the camps, the entire world was shocked to learn what the Nazis had hidden. As a result of finding these camps, some Allied soldiers went about killing surrendered German men because they were so angry at what they found. In late January 1945, Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviets, and in April, the Americans liberated Dachau. In April, the Battle of Berlin would begin, with the Soviets bombarding the city ruthlessly. By now, the German high command was in total disarray. Nearly everyone was discombobulated. Hitler, still in his bunker, would rant and rave about how his men and generals have failed him and how fictitious units would come and liberate Berlin. Of course, none of this would happen. Men of the SS, Volkssturm, Hitler Youth, and more would attempt to fend off the Soviets. However, it was futile, as for every one German fighter, there were 10 Soviets. Knowing the war was lost and fearing capture or worse, Adolf Hitler, the man responsible for the deaths and suffering of millions, would take his own life on the 30th of April, 1945. Many SS men and even men of the Wehrmacht would follow suit, as they preferred death over Soviet capture. Nazi Germany would officially surrender unconditionally to the Allied powers on the 8th of May, 1945, ending World War II. The SS, the organization responsible for the death and suffering of countless innocent people, would be dissolved shortly thereafter.